Let's get this shit started.
This is the Down and Dirty Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast with your host, Nick Anderson.
What is up, Dynasty Degenerates? This is your host, Nick Anderson, with the Down and Dirty Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast, or as y'all know it, the Triple DFFP. And you guys, we have a special guest host with us today. We've got Phillip Caldwell from Pro Football Network. You can find him on Twitter at DumpsterDiveFF. He is here to tell us about his 2020 Fantasy Football Consistency Collection. And guys, this is an absolutely vital source to be looking at in your redraft and dynasty leagues. What's up, Phillip? Thanks for coming on the show.
No, man, thank you for having me. I am stoked to talk about this. This is the first podcast I've done in a long time, so this is going to be fun.
Hell yeah, man. So why don't you tell us about your page, tell us about, more importantly, the Consistency Collection, and tell us how it works, how we can use it.
Awesome, perfect. So a little bit about me. Been playing fantasy football for like 10 years, ever since basically moved away from home, way to kind of keep up the competitive juices with our high school friends and stuff like that.
Right.
And recently, getting more and more involved with it the past 5 years, started writing in a few different places, just was with RotoViz, just joined Pro Football Network. And I'm an accountant at my 9 to 5. So, I'm always in Excel spreadsheets. I'm always looking at different financial analytics and stuff like that. And as I was doing some stuff, I learned about the coefficient of variation, which let's not go too far into a statistics class for everybody. But basically, you use this to take unrelated data and boil it down to one metric that you can then actually compare, right?
Okay.
And so I thought, well, holy crap, wait a second. This is amazing for fantasy football if I do this right. So I started kind of tweaking around with it and playing with it and seeing how I could use this this principle to create a very consistent metric, because that was what was driving me crazy about other people's consistency data. Is they would say this player was a top 10 running back 90% of the time versus this player that was a top 10 running back this many weeks. And it's like, well, what makes a top 10 running back changes every week. So your math changes every week. So your consistency formula isn't consistent in and of itself.
Right.
This, using the coefficient of variation as the backbone, allows me to create one formula that I just dump everybody's weekly scores into every single week. And It gives me a score. The higher the score, the higher not only consistent that player is, but with a higher ceiling.
Okay.
Because what basically a CV, the closer to 0 is the more consistent. So if you divide a number by something close to 0, it skyrockets high, right?
Right.
If you divide a high number by something that's also closer to 0, it gets even higher. So basically, if you have the same CV between two different players, the player, if I use their actual fantasy output, the player with the higher ceiling is going to have a higher consistency score.
Okay.
The best part about this too is if you follow it and go with it in season, it's actually comparable between positions. It's position agnostic. So if you have a running back with a higher CV, with a higher consistency score or CS, then you have a wide receiver, and you're thinking about those two players for your flex position, you can go with the person with the higher consistency score. It's actually comparable across positions, which is very, very rare.
Oh, that is clutch, man. I mean, that is absolutely crucial when you're playing in these leagues, especially, I've seen so many leagues start to go away with defenses and kickers and start to add, 2-3 flex spots in on the league. And so having something that you can compare players across positions to be able to apply to that flex spot is absolutely clutch.
Exactly. Once I realized that this was not only going to work, but work across positions, that's when I really got excited about this.
Oh yeah, man. All right. So I think we've got a good grasp of how we use it so far. And before we dive into some of the players that we're going to talk about and their respective CVs, you can find all of this on Pro Football Network in season. So that's where this is all going to be accessible at. So just jump over there, check out Phillip's work, and you're going to see why it's so important once we get done with this. So let's start off with the first player on the board. And the first
Let me plug one other thing too.
Yeah, my bad, man. No, go for it.
No, yeah. One of the things I'm going to get in there after the first couple of weeks of the season, or maybe I might use last year's data just to put it in there week one, but is actually defensive points allowed to positions based on around the CV also. So you can see which teams are allowing consistently allowing high points to which position.
Okay, that's awesome. So, I mean, you can start actually playing, instead of just looking at strength of schedule, you can start actually applying it to, a number, a numerical value that you can feel, to it.
Exactly. Real simple and digestible.
Oh, yeah, man. That's what we like on Twitter,
Exactly.
All right, so we are going to get into the first one that we've got on the board here, and we're going to be going over Matt Stafford. So let's do this screen share. Let's hope that this banner, is the banner cutting it off, or is it right there online? I think it's right there.
Right there on the line. Perfect.
Awesome. So why don't you just kind of tell us the format, how we can look at this, what it all says for us,
Right. So there's a lot of stuff in the consistency collection. We do players at a glance, where you can see how many weeks they ended as a QB1, QB2, or outside the QB3 range. Same with running backs, wide receiver, tight ends. We also do the weekly graphs. So I put a chart on there. It's all ranked by the consistency score, and then you can see each week what they scored point-wise, and I highlight when they're a top 10 guy versus outside the top 24, etc. But this is the meat and potatoes right here. This is the player write-ups. We have 250 players in the consistency collection, and we did write-ups on all of them.
Wow.
And so what we got, what's that?
I said, that's a tall order, man.
Yeah, it was a beast. It was a project, especially with everybody getting more involved in fantasy football earlier this year. I wanted to try to get it done a little earlier than we initially planned. And so it was quite the grind. But I think it pays off, because so what you have here is not only the consistency score, which you see for Stafford is 8.66, but then you can real quick see where he ranked in consistency score, which was the 7th overall quarterback. We compare that with the end of season ranking at his position and the end of season total fantasy points. And then we also, this guide was mainly kind of meant for redraft purposes as far as the ADP goes. But then we also list out his average fantasy points per game. We give you a quick little stat line so you can see, just exactly what his stat line was for the year. I give you historical consistency if I have it. Now, this is the first year I really blossom this project into this many players. So some of the players I don't have historical data for yet, but it's coming. Right next to the ADP, we give you a little write-up of saying whether or not we think that this is a good ADP, or if it's a little bit too high based on around their consistency. And then right below his stat line, we give you more of an in-depth actual write-up, where this is where, the consistency score is really taking a snapshot of 2019 and what they did. Now, the draft, trades, free agency, all that stuff is really going to affect some of these players more than others. And so that's where we take it into account. That's where we go into the analysis of if a new draft pick got, snagged in the second round and really going to eat into the carries of this running back or that wide receiver or anything like that. So that's where we go into the analysis of what the consistency score is, what it means for the player, for that player, and what the new surroundings around him are going to, how they're going to affect that.
Right. And that is something huge for me, because when I first heard about the consistency score, it started to concern me a little bit, because I was worried about, sometimes we get these numbers guys that lock in solely on what the numbers tell me, and then they don't actually take a logical approach on like the change, the ebb and flow in the offense, coaching schemes, all of those things. And it sounds like you guys have not only done the work to be able to ensure that the consistency score is accurate, but gone the extra length to be able to take those logical steps and the changes in the offense, which is absolutely just vital.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we really wanted to do. There's more to this. It's a game, based on a game that's based around a weird oblong leather ball. Like nothing's going to be perfect.
Right.
And so no number is really going to nail it. And so, yeah, that we wanted to give it a little bit of an editorial approach as well.
And so we'll get started off, we're just talking now that we understand how it's used, now that we understand the meat and potatoes of it, and now we understand why it's better than a lot of the numbers out there. Then we can start to talk about the actual players that we're looking at right now. So let's get into Matt Stafford. And I know that he had a limited season in 2019, but as you told me before the episode started, it's a 4-game threshold to see if we can start applying a consistency ranking to it, correct?
Right. I like to give players at least 4 games before we actually include them in this, because I think that is really when we are able to start seeing the numbers solidify.
Right.
So, like, for example, what I'm going to do with week 1, post week 1 of 2020 is I'm actually going to use the last 4 weeks of 2019 plus week 1 and carry the number forward that way.
Oh, wow. Okay. I like that.
Yeah. And also with it, it's injury agnostic. I don't include games that they miss because of injury or anything like that. So in Stafford's case, all of those injuries, all of those games he missed because of injury, they don't show up as a 0. They just don't show up at all.
Okay. Perfect. And so tell us what, the consistency score it tells us about Matt Stafford.
So with him, I think that players are really able to get a good injury discount in the draft. He was on pace for over 580 pass attempts and nearly 5,000 yards and 38 touchdowns if he would have played at his full 16 games at his pace. So he was rocking it. Not only that, but he was a top 7 consistency scorer, which means he's really consistently scoring a high level of points in those games that he was playing at. And so the fact that he in redraft leagues he's going in the 11th in let's see if I can find him in a dynasty real quick. Stafford, he's going 1206 in dynasty startups. So even better for you guys. I really think he's a good win now quarterback that you guys can get in drafts very late and for virtually no capital.
I could not agree more on that. Stafford has been one of the guys in dynasty startups. 1 QB, 2 QB, especially as like a second QB on a 2 QB team. He is an absolute godsend.
If you can get Stafford as your second QB, mwah.
Yeah. And I mean, he's 32 years old. So, I mean, he's not, if you go and look, it seems like he's been around forever. But if you look at the Matt Ryans, the Aaron Rodgers, all those guys are older than Matt Stafford. And we've still seen consistently good football out of him, barring injury, And so I think that, yeah, you were hitting the nail on the head when you talk about a late round steal. An ADP of 1103 in redraft and in the 12th round in Dynasty is atrocious, and you should be picking him up every chance that you get around that ADP.
I'm going to go try a trade for him in the league I'm in.
I would too, man. I mean, you get those people, it's what have you done for me lately? And he hasn't done much for you lately. But you think about it, and we've got a presumably healthy Marvin Jones and TJ Hawkinson coming back, and then the emergence of Kenny Golladay, who even took a step forward in Stafford's absence last year. I think that this is honestly going to be one of the most lucrative fantasy football backfields and offenses that we're going to see this year. I think it's really going to hit all cylinders.
Yeah, Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay are 2 of my favorite wide receivers to grab in drafts as well.
Yep. I am a huge fan of both of those guys, and we're not going to talk about him today, but Marvin Jones is another incredible late-round steal.
Oh, yeah. He's actually one of the guys, too, with a surprisingly high consistency score.
It does not surprise me in the least bit. All right, well, let's go on to our next guy. The next one that we're going to be talking about is the ever-controversial Joe Mixon. So let's hear what the consistency score has to say about him.
So, Mixon had a season. Only 33% of his games was he actually an RB1. It helps that most of those games came towards the back end of the season, and so he's getting a little bit of a recency bias. But when we look at his season on the whole, he was only ranked 18th in consistency score among running backs. It's really not that great when you consider how high he's going in both redraft and dynasty leagues. And that was kind of one of the things that when I saw his consistency score ranking versus his ADP, it really shot off as a red flag to me. There's just a lot of other players I think I'd like ahead of Mixon because, yes, we hope that Joe Burrow is going to bring another element to that offense that's going to help him a little bit. But really, that offensive line last year did not help him. They've got, a guy coming back from injury who was a high draft pick the year before. Hopefully that helps the offensive line, but we're saying hopefully a lot. And I don't really want to say hopefully about my first round draft pick.
I can completely agree with that. The one thing that I do have to say from Mixon is that I think that since he's 23 years old, he's coming up on a new contract. I think that he is one of the 2016 or 2017 draft class that is most likely to receive a contract. So I think that, you look at the Dalvin Cooks and the Alvin Kamaras, they are in teams that already have solidified, talent around them that isn't young, that has already gotten their contracts. But then you look at the Bengals, and he's in line. I think they need a veteran presence in the locker room, and he could be that veteran presence. And they've front-loaded so much rookie depth that they have the money to be able to pay a veteran running back in Joe Mixon. So I'm still buying him in dynasty leagues, but it's super interesting. And actually one of the reasons why I traded him away last year, and I'm kind of kicking myself now, judging by the last 5 weeks, but I traded him away because of the lack of consistency that he was putting forth at the start of the year.
Yeah, I mean, before the first 2 weeks in half-point scoring formats, he didn't even crest 5 points in a week, and then all of a sudden he jumps up to 16, and then he was back down to 8. I mean, he was just kind of all over the place to start the year, and you're right. Like, definitely, I think the security that Joe Mixon has is really good with the Bengals, but I'm just wondering if the Bengals are still really a few Jenga pieces away from being a pure, fantasy offense.
Right. And so you're saying, apples to apples, if you have another guy on the board that has a higher consistency ranking than him, and you only know it if you go and look at the consistency ranking on Pro Football Network, then maybe that might be the thing that tips you over the edge to lean to that other running back.
Exactly. Like, to me, I think that there's a few other guys I'd rather just take in the first round and solidify. Like if I'm at the back end of the first round, I'm probably grabbing one of those, just steady Eddie wide receivers that I can count on that's going to last me forever in Dynasty too. And then a guy like Aaron Jones is going a little bit later, who had a much higher consistency score of 6.4. And in redraft, he's, back in the second round instead of the first. So that's kind of where I'm thinking. Like I'm looking to make the wiser investment.
Nice. Yeah. I do worry about Aaron Jones' contract situation in the presence of my arch nemesis, A.J. Dillon. Because if you don't know, I have mad hate for that man. But, that's for a different
I did not know that, but that's funny.
But so let's go on to a little less even consistent running back, but somebody that you can get at a much lower price, David Montgomery.
So Montgomery's consistency score was ugly. Mainly because of that week 7, he scored at 0.9 right after their bye week, which was shocking. But then right after that, week 8 and week 9, he was both over 20 points in half-point formats. So we see that Montgomery has that ceiling possibility. If the Browns will just commit to giving him the ball. And really, he was – sorry?
You mean the Bears?
Bears. What did I say?
Browns.
God, I'm tired.
It's
when
all
I'm
right,
tired
man.
and I've got a stutter, God only knows what happens.
Hey, I get it, man. Don't worry about it. Keep going, though.
But the Browns did one thing this year that really solidified my David Montgomery belief a little bit more, because he was a guy I was really down on right until the draft. And when the there we go again. When the Bears, when the Bears didn't go after another running back, I really think that David Montgomery was one of the sneaky winners of this year's draft, because he didn't really perform the way we expected him to in 2019, but he's still got the show all to himself, and we can already ink in right now at least 300 total touches. So the fact that he is going so much later in redraft leagues, I think he's a bargain because of that. And if I can find him real quick, Montgomery. He's going in the third round in Dynasty startup. So even that, I mean, you're getting a guy who's, like I said, just about guaranteed 300 touches in the third round. I think that's a steal. And he's young.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm looking right now. He's June, he's a June birthday, so he's 22, coming up on, what is the date today?
Third?
Yeah, so he's going to be 23 here shortly.
It feels like the 73rd of Marchtober.
That is not a joke at all, sir. But yeah, he is coming up on 23 years old. He is the heir apparent to all of the rushing touches in Chicago. And I think that we talked about this earlier about how, it's what have you done for me lately? And David Montgomery hasn't done much for you lately, but we're ignoring the fact that he had a great collegiate career. He was a standout product coming into the draft. He was a desirable player that a lot of people were super excited about. And because of 1 year of a rough transition and, a not so great offense with a shitty quarterback behind the center, then we're looking at him as an inferior player. But other people's lapse in judgment can be your gain in a draft. So don't let him slip through your fingers. I actually just picked him up in a best ball draft here recently. I've been snagging him everywhere that I can get him because in terms of guys that you can just make an educated guess of a dart throw on, he's one of them.
And you nailed it on the head when you talked about Trubisky. I don't think Trubisky is good for any fantasy players around him. If Foles can just step it up just a little bit, right, I think that Bears offense could really help a lot of fantasy players.
Yeah, open up the receptions, get the wide receivers going, loosen up the box a little bit, I mean, all of those things play into the production of a running back. And I think that we saw that hurt David Montgomery's production, and I hope that maybe we can see in 2020 a little bit of an increase in that. So at ADP 411, a guy that's going to get 300 carries, we think that he's a smash grab there. Let's move on to – all right, we're going to be talking about my guy, my number 6, I believe, dynasty wide receiver, DJ Moore with the Carolina Panthers. Let's hear about it, Phil.
Well, you're not far off from his consistency score ranking, number 5 among all wide receivers, and that was with the weird, carousel of quarterbacks in Carolina. Now He gets Teddy Bridgewater, who I don't think is necessarily the most exciting quarterback by himself, but I think he's awesome quarterback for DJ Moore. We saw what he was able to do stepping into New Orleans. He loved Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas didn't slip at all. DJ Moore is not Michael Thomas, but I really think that Bridgewater is going to just pummel him with targets. He was already consistent. He was already a focal point. Robbie Anderson doesn't scare me at all coming over. I think DJ Moore is going to be a steal for players in 2020, especially if you can get him as your second wide receiver.
Yep, 100%. And I mean, we're looking at a current ADP and redraft of 409, which I just think is highway robbery. I mean, he just turned 23 years old in April. The guy is incredibly young. So, I mean, if we're looking at it from a dynasty perspective, the guy has an entire career ahead of him, but he's shown us a number 5 consistency score ranking, which is just huge in my eyes. He's shown that he can do it game in, game out. It's not the flash that we see with a player like, and I'm not downgrading Mike Evans here, but it's not, the big games and the fall-off games like we see with the Mike Evans. It is a consistent production, a lot like we've seen in what makes Michael Thomas the number 1 dynasty wide receiver overall.
Yeah, he's had a few games in 2019 where he was under double digits, but very few. I mean, his floor is almost right around the 12-13, whereas we saw in week 12 his ceiling is up at 28. So he's just a guy that you can plug and play every single week.
And since you've got it up, what's his dynasty ADP right now?
His dynasty ADP is a bit higher. I think his age, like you were talking about, it's a 208. So
okay, and I mean, I think that's probably pretty accurately priced for me. I said that he's my number 6 dynasty wide receiver, and of course, I always prioritize running backs over wide receivers for the most part in dynasty, even though the longevity of the wide receivers is there. It's always important to get those running backs. So, I mean, 208, that's probably right around, maybe even a little bit on the low end of where I'd snag him at.
Yeah, he's a guy. If I was in a dynasty startup, I have no problem, grabbing him at the turn.
Yep. Hell yeah, man. All right, well, let's move on to our next guy, who we are going to be talking about, Cooper Kupp. All right, and I've got a ton of love for Cooper Kupp. He was one of those guys that I drafted, and didn't have the highest hopes for, and he just came out in spades for me, and has not, for the most part, let me down since then. And so let's look at his consistency ranking and where he falls in.
So his consistency ranking came in at 16 among wide receivers, a 4.78, and granted, the running backs of the non-QB positions, running backs have the higher average consistency score than wide receivers, and then tight ends lowest. So as we go through the positions, you'll kind of see the average score get lower that we're talking about.
Okay.
So his 4.78 was 16th among all wide receivers. But what's really interesting is he really had a season or 2 seasons in one, right?
Right.
If we look at the first, 8 weeks of the season right before their bye, he was averaging 17 fantasy points a game. If we look at the week after their bye until the fantasy playoffs, he averaged 9 points a game. With that big drop-off also came the emergence of Tyler Higbee. And I think that looking at the two of these players together is what's really important, because if you're high on Cooper Kupp, I don't think you can be high on Tyler Higbee. And if you're high on Tyler Higbee, I don't think you can be high on Cooper Kupp. And I think, the fact that Brandon Cooks is leaving is elevating Cooper Kupp's hype a little bit this offseason. And I don't think it should. I think he's going to stay in the exact same role, which is a really good one with Jared Goff. He's
right.
Like a security blanket.
Yeah.
But I don't think that he's, necessarily rising up to wide receiver 1 status.
I would completely agree with that. I am a huge Cooper Kupp, believer, and I am not so high on Higbee. I'm not denouncing him, but I am saying that I need to see a little bit more before I jump on the hype train. But I would say that, Cooper Kupp is not a wide receiver 1. He is a wide receiver 2 all day in my book. They're fortunate enough to have 2 wide receiver 2s in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods.
Yeah, and we have to realize that 10 receiving touchdowns in 2019, that's likely to regress a little bit. And so that's gonna hit him, that's gonna ding him a little bit. And right now he's going really high in drafts, and it's a little nervous for me.
Yeah, an ADP of 212 in redraft is just way too high for my taste, and I'll pretty much be passing on that every single chance that I get. I'm not going to be on Cooper Kupp, but I'm not paying that price for him. What's his Dynasty ADP?
Let's see. Oh, wow, it's actually lower, 3.8 according to a fantasy football calculator.
Okay, and I don't actually have like a breakdown in front of me, so just off the top of my head, 3.8 isn't the worst, but we need to take into consideration that Cooper Kupp, even though we've seen, only a couple years of his production, he was an old wide receiver coming into the NFL, so he's going to be 27 years old when he starts playing this season. 27 years old is the same age as guys like OBJ, Mike Evans, guys like that, And so when we're looking at Cooper Kupp and the stuff that he's putting out there and the competition that he has, combined with the age, you have to start thinking about these guys. It's one of those mind fucks, You've seen Keenan Allen play forever, and you think that he's ancient, and I think the beard doesn't help him. And then Cooper Kupp, and think about like the 2 or 3 seasons that we've seen from him. But same age as Keenan Allen. So that's when you start to have to look at the data, look at the analysis, look at the consistency rankings, and the information that we're providing on the podcast, and make an educated decision when you're doing your dynasty drafts.
Yeah, and even 3.8, even in Dynasty, worries me just a little bit, because if you are like me and do tend to, stock up on the running back like you were talking about, because I'll do it too, that means Cooper Kupp is the first wide receiver you're taking.
Right.
And
exactly.
And I don't know if that's a gamble I'm willing to take, especially now that you put that age thing into perspective. I didn't realize that. Jesus.
Yeah. It's the longevity effect, and that's why. Do I think that DJ Moore might necessarily be a better wide receiver in a better situation than some of the people that have fallen below him in my dynasty rankings? No, I don't. But because of his age and because of the timeline that you're going to have him for on your team, it's like everybody talks about, where if you drafted Drew Brees 15 years ago, you would have had him forever.
Right.
And it'd just be great. That's the kind of same thing that we're looking at with a consistent player like DJ Moore. But Cooper Kupp, so we're looking at his consistency ranking. It's good, not great. There's the emergence of Higbee with the ever-present Robert Woods there, and we think his ADP is probably a little bit too rich for our blood.
Yep.
All right, well, let's go on to
I like watching him play.
Yes, very much so. Yes, he is electric. Especially in 2018, it was so exciting to see him come back. That was the year he came back from the ACL injury, right?
Yeah. That was stupid. Yes, I don't know how he did what he did.
I'm a Chiefs fan, if you can't tell, and so I remember. So I remember watching the Chiefs Rams game when they were supposed to play in Mexico, but they blundered the field somehow. Roger Goodell couldn't get a fucking turf team down there to do something in 2 months. Like my high school team had a fucking turf field put in, and you can't do that in Mexico, Roger Goodell. Get the fuck out of my face with that. But I digress. We are now under the guy that I dislike also, Tyler Higbee. Let's go.
All right. So, again, such two different seasons. It all together came up with a 2019 score of 2.36. But if we look at the first half of the season, when it really ran through Cooper Kupp and we had a healthy Gerald Everett, his consistency score was 1.47, which is 34th among tight ends. I mean, just completely not usable. Then after the bye week, Gerald Everett's injured. For some reason, the targets just completely shifted. Now he goes up to 2.77, which would have been 11th among all tight ends.
Okay.
It makes it really hard to really anticipate what we're going to see in 2020, obviously. Right. But considering all of those moving pieces, considering the fact that I do think Cam Akers is a pretty good back and going to get some of those targets that they, for some reason, decided not to give Todd Gurley. Don't understand that one either. I just don't see Tyler Higbee repeating the second half of that season. I do think Robert Woods, I do think Cooper Kupp are going to be more of the target hogs. I do think that Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee are going to basically cannibalize each other and make neither one of them useful for us.
Kind of like what we've seen every year that they've been together in the Rams.
Exactly. Like, why are we basically suddenly putting on a pedestal the last 5 weeks of the season versus, the first 35 weeks we saw with this offense? It just didn't make sense.
And I mean, I do think that people are putting a lot of weight on the fact that Higbee got the contract and Everett didn't. But in my opinion, I mean, you're going to use a player if you have him at your disposal until he's not at your disposal anymore. So, I mean, if we're ever looking for a time when Higbee's really going to be the standout, it's going to be 21, not 20, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if anything, why not use the crap out of Gerald Everett the last year you have him and kind of wear out his body and then start using Higbee?
Yep, I completely agree. But so, I mean, at a current ADP of 11.12, we're looking at him in the 11th round. I'd have to be looking at people that are in comparison to him, but it's not the worst ADP that I've seen, because I do think that he's going to be a viable tight end. And like I was talking about in one of my articles and one of my Twitter debates that I got in here recently, it's not that difficult to become a viable tight end in the NFL. I mean, 500 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns is going to get you in the top 5 discussion. And I think that with McVay's offense, that's fully in the realm of possibility with Higbee. So, I mean, 11, 12 is an okay ADP for me. But if guys, I'm not telling you to go do this, but if you can go get like a Hayden Hurst, three rounds later, that's somebody that I might be interested in. I like the sleeper aspect of Hurst. If you're not going to be getting one of the top tight end guys for me, then I would be punting it and waiting for somebody that could maybe have a breakout this year.
Exactly. The Rams offense has really been great about spreading the ball around ever since McVay got there. And that just means that Higbee is always going to have a pretty limited upside, really, because he's never going to get the same amount of targets. A few guys, at least when I was writing the ADP part of this guide, that were going after Tyler Higbee that I think have way more upside possibility are Ebron, Gesicki, and Disley. Mm-hmm. And if I can take any one of those 3 tight ends in like my last pick or two, I'm going to go with that and shoot for the stars. And if it doesn't work out, I invested very little to no draft capital in them.
Right. I completely agree with that strategy. Like I said, if you can't get yourself a Kelsey, a Kittle, and Andrews, who I'm huge on Mark Andrews this year. I actually got him in my best ball draft as well. And even down to like an Evan Ingram, those guys. If you can't secure one of the top 5, in my opinion, then it's not even worth it. Then you just kind of wait until the later rounds when the talent dissipates and they're just sitting there waiting for you.
Exactly. Shoot for upside. Other than that, punt the position.
Oh yeah, man. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the players that we have gotten the chance to go over on the consistency collection today. Like I said earlier, if you want to go see this stuff in season, it's going to be at Pro Football Network. And you can also see Phillip at Dumpster Dive Fantasy for FF on Twitter, puts out some great content. And this thing is just going to be so huge, being able to talk about not only drafts, but start-sit decisions within the season. It's going to be absolutely vital to you guys. So let's hear just one last thing from you, Phillip.
Yeah, thank you very much again for having me. Love talking about football. If you get the chance, the consistency collection is available on Amazon, paperback, ebook, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's actually free. So you can grab it on that if you're paying for Kindle Unlimited already, and just take it to all of your drafts. I've got the very easy to read and digest rankings real clearly for you. I've got these player write-ups that you got to see a sample of. And then we go into even more things, like I said, the players at a glance and the weekly scoring guide, so you can see exactly what made up this consistency score.
Oh, yeah, man. Well, hey, thank you so much for being on the channel. I love the information. I'm always so happy to have somebody come on here and talk about statistical analysis, because I try and dip my toe into it, but it often goes right over my fucking head. So, I appreciate the insight, man. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. As always, like, share, and subscribe down below. And thanks, guys. I hope you like what I said, but if you don't, fuck it, because I'm not drunk today because I was on a boat all day and I didn't get to drink any when I got home. So see you guys later.